Do you have questions about your employment rights? Ask a Lawyer is here for you. Each week, experts from EmploymentLawyer.ca answer your questions. Visit cp24.com/askalawyer and watch Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on CP24.
Welcome once again and back this week for another edition of Ask a Lawyer here on CP24. So good to have you along. Tuck in for the next half hour. You're going to learn a lot about workplace rights and employment law. That's what we do every week here on this show. And welcome again, John Scholes here, and joining me momentarily, employment lawyer Lior Samfiru from EmploymentLawyer.ca. Right off the top, I always give you the contact information because after the shows, when you're going to want to make that phone call or drop that email over to Lior and his very capable team, 1-888-861-4555. Ask at EmploymentLawyer.ca, and we'll dive into the website called PocketEmploymentLawyer.ca a little later on the show. I know Lior likes to bring that up every show, so that is coming up. Plus everything you need to know as an employee about medical leave a little later on as well. Plus radio shows. By the way, you can join us each week on our radio show across the country pretty much, but right here locally in the GTA, News Talk 1010, Sundays at 1 p.m. You can call in, ask your questions, take your time, get some answers, and maybe your phone call will appear on this show at a later date. So some of those coming up in our main topic as well. But Lior, we always get warmed up, stretch a little with the week that was, pal. Good to see you. What do you got for us this week?
Hey, John, always great to be here, of course, to talk about employment law. I know there's a lot of questions because that's what I do all day. I field these questions in my office, phone and email. Lots of people wanting to know about their workplace rights, wanting to know if what their boss is doing is legal, wanting to know what they should do if they're facing a dilemma, an ultimatum, if they lost their job or if their job is changing. Well, on this show, we tackle these issues every single week. So this is an opportunity for you to learn, to be informed, to be educated on those very, very important things. A lot of people don't understand or appreciate just how good a laws we have here in this province, frankly, across Canada. On the show, we'll tell you what those rights are. If things are going well for you, maybe not so important, but if you're dealing with some workplace issues, you really need to know and understand those rights. And of course, to connect with me, as John said, beyond the 30 minutes of the show, we'll give you that contact information so we can continue the discussion by phone, by email. But I always like to start off with the situation that came across my desk, just so you can see the types of issues that I'm dealing with, because at some point that may happen to you as well. So I was speaking with a very nice lady who, during the pandemic, like so many others, was shifted to working from home. So for the past 2.5 years, she's been working exclusively from home. Now, in the meantime, she started developing some health issues as well. So it was a bit of a shock for her when her employer recently said that they're going to require her to come into the office 3 days a week moving forward. The problem with that was she just was not physically able now because she had some physical limitations to do that. And she did the right thing. She provided the doctor's note to her employer saying that she needs to be accommodated. She can't come back to the office. The employer gave her a hard time. They were questioning her. They really wanted a follow-up note. Eventually, they conceded. Fine. Okay, we'll allow you to work from home. So she was very happy with that. Fast forward 3 weeks later, she gets called into a meeting and told, unfortunately, we decided we're letting you go for lack of work. We're going to wish you goodbye. I know you've been with us for 9 years, but we're going to say goodbye to you. So she calls me. She's very upset, of course, and she wants to understand her rights. The reality, John, here is you don't have to be a genius to figure out that they're letting her go because of this work from home scenario, because they didn't want to accommodate her. That is not legal. You cannot let someone go because they need accommodation. Cannot let someone go because they're sick. That's illegal. That's a human rights violation. Can't happen. And the timing here makes it very clear that that's what they're doing. So this is an illegal termination. I'm going to help her here. I'm going to get her damages. She's, of course, owed severance, potentially north of 12 months' pay, just on the severance piece. But I wanted to remind, of course, all our viewers here that you do need to be accommodated, and your employer can't punish you if you need that accommodation. Start with that doctor's note. If your employer won't accommodate you, won't acknowledge your doctor's note, lets you go, you call me right away and I'll deal with it.
You know, what's funny, this employer, Lior, really dropped the ball on this one. We're not talking accommodation like they had to build her an elevator in the building. This is simply her working at home. It's an easy fix. Now, based on that, how high is that threshold generally when it comes to accommodation? Does it depend on the size of the company and their resources?
Well, it appears that what the company was concerned here is that what are other employees going to say? You know, if we accommodate you, everyone else is going to want to work from home as well, and that's not fair. Well, guess what? That is not a good enough reason not to accommodate. Even if it causes some headaches, even if it causes some conflict maybe with other employees, your employer has to accommodate you. Now, at some point, if the accommodation is so outrageous, so over the top, so costly, yes, of course, the employer doesn't have to go that far. But in this case, it was a no-brainer. She'd been working successfully from home for 2.5 years. So this employer clearly could have done it, but chose not to. Again, that's a human rights violation.
And as we mentioned off the top of the show, you can join us on radio each week, pretty much across the country, EmploymentLawyer.ca, to find a station you can tune into and join the conversation as well. And right here locally in the GTA, News Talk 1010, Sundays at 1 p.m. And always make that phone call too, right? 1-888-861-4555. Didn't mention the phone calls. Want to peel one from one of our radio shows right now, Lior. We're going to play it back. We're going to talk about it a bit. Here it comes.
I've been working for 23 years, and I'm the office manager, payroll, accounts payable, receivable, all that. And they're outsourcing, do it at another location. Within a couple of months, I won't have a job. And I was told that they want to keep me on part-time, but now it looks like they're just eliminating it completely. And I'm sort of on tenterhooks waiting to see what's going to happen.
How old are you currently?
66.
So, you know, this is obviously very frustrating for someone that's worked there for that long. She doesn't want to lose her job. She just wants to continue doing the job that she's done. And I get that completely. But from a legal standpoint, her employer is allowed to let her go. Frustrating, yes. Scary for sure. But an employer can allow her or can decide to let her go. They can't just reduce her pay. But if they want to part ways, severance has to be paid, and that is the key. So after 23 years, she's going to have a substantial amount of severance. So let's focus on that, because that's what the law can do for her, to make sure that she gets proper severance. Rather than just tell you how much severance she's going to get, I'm going to show you how you can do it yourself and find out how much you're owed. We're going to go to PocketEmploymentLawyer.ca. We're going to use our severance calculator tool used by over 2 million people so far. And let's plug the information in and see how much severance she gets. So she's in an office managerial role. She's been there for 23 years. Company says, we're going to give you a couple months notice. Well, you see right there that she's owed 2 years of severance. 2 years. She's in her 60s as well. 2 years of severance, that's what she's owed. That's how important it is to get that severance amount right. It could be quite substantial. So if you lost your job, are worried about losing your job, or are just curious to know what you're owed, check out our severance calculator at PocketEmploymentLawyer.ca.
All right, Lior, let's get into our first break of the show, and it's going to dovetail nicely off our week that was. We get into what employees should know about medical leaves. That's the main topic, and it's coming up just ahead right here on Ask a Lawyer on CP24. Stick around.
You have questions about your employment rights? Ask a Lawyer is here for you. Each week, experts from EmploymentLawyer.ca answer your questions. Visit cp24.com/askalawyer and watch Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on CP24.
And thank you so much for sticking around with us here on Ask a Lawyer on CP24. Lior Samfiru, our employment lawyer, of course, from EmploymentLawyer.ca, always reachable on the phone, 1-888-861-4555. Ask at EmploymentLawyer.ca as well. As we mentioned, Lior, main topic for the show this time round is going to be everything employees should know about medical leaves. And I know we touched a bit about on that with our week that was, but want to get right into this. First of all, how long can an employee be off on a medical leave? And the part two of that, I guess, is how much information need you share with your employee, if any? What do you think?
Well, the answer to both of these questions is essentially the same. It's your doctor. You have to go by what your doctor says. So there's no time limit to how long you can be off on a medical leave. It's up to your doctor. If your doctor says you need a week, well, then guess what? You need a week. If your doctor says we'll evaluate you after 18 months, then you're going to be there for 18 months off work, and then you'll be evaluated. So there is no time limit, and it's not up to you, the employee, and it's not up to your employer. It's up to your doctor. Your employer doesn't get to say, no, this is too long, or this is too much, or we don't believe it. No, it's what your doctor says. That tool, that doctor's note is so powerful. Now, of course, the question then becomes, well, how much information should I share with my employer? I don't want to tell him about my private health info, and that is completely correct. You don't need to. Your employer does not have a right to demand to know what kind of a medical condition you have or what medication you're taking, what specialists you're seeing. Not at all. The only thing your employer is entitled to know is, can you work or can you not work? Or do you need any accommodation? So as long as you provide them with the doctor's note saying, I cannot work and I'm not going to be able to work for the next 6 months, that is it. And an employer is asking that, then that frankly is overreaching. You can say no to that. You don't have to tell them what the condition is. If your employer gives you a hard time, if they don't abide by your doctor, if they don't believe your doctor, give me a call.
How about this? What are employees' rights when on medical leave, Lior, and what happens to their job? Do they have one to come back to?
So first of all, the first thing you have to do when you're on a medical leave is follow your doctor's advice. Do whatever you need to get better, to get healthy so you can come back to work. Now, what happens to your job is this. When you're ready to come back to work, whether you've been off for a month or a year, when you're ready to come back to work, your job is not necessarily guaranteed, but what is guaranteed is your employer has to make all efforts to bring you back to the same job and the same pay. If the job that you had does not exist because someone else is doing it, maybe they have to make efforts to find a similar job for you. If they've tried and they've looked and there's just nothing available, at that point and only in that point can they let you go with full severance. But an employer that doesn't go through that exercise, that doesn't try to bring you back, doesn't try to find the appropriate position for you, is in breach of our human rights legislation. Can't do that. So your employer has to try. And if you're feeling that your employer did not try, did not want you back, just offhand dismissed you, or maybe didn't even get back to you, that employer is doing something illegal and you have to give me a call.
We are talking about everything an employee should know about medical leave. So say, Lior, the person's been off work, the employee's been off work, that are starting to drift over into long-term disability territory. What happens if they're denied those benefits or if the employer won't even take them back to work?
So certainly, I see this often, and we have a whole group of lawyers in our office dealing just with situations where your disability insurer says, nah, we don't think you're sick enough, we're going to cut you off, or we're going to deny you those benefits. Understand that insurance companies really should not be denying you benefits if your doctor says you cannot work. Unfortunately, they're in the business of trying to deny. They want to get you off their payrolls. So we need to push back. If your insurance company won't pay you, despite the fact you have those benefits, you've paid into them, we need to push back. Usually once they hear from us, they'll back off, they'll back down, or if not, then we can negotiate proper compensation. So understand that. And of course, your employer has to do what your doctor says. Your employer can't say, wait a second, the insurance company is not paying you, therefore, we're going to tell you to come back to work. Those are separate things. Your doctor's note is all you need for the employer. And if your insurance company is not cooperating, not supporting you, let us push back.
And a reminder, a lot of the stuff we talk about weekly on the show can be found at EmploymentLawyer.ca. It's absolutely free and anonymous for you to use that website, so totally take advantage of that. And a reminder as well, News Talk 1010 right here in the GTA. Catch our radio show Sundays, 1 p.m. We take the phone calls from the show, and they appear on this show. It's magic. We'll get to our second call for the evening right here, Lior.
Working as a courier, as an independent contractor, and what happened was I ended up getting fired for just telling other drivers that he wasn't paying us our gas allowance. And I wonder if that's the cause or if it's termination compensation.
Were you working full-time hours?
Yeah, strictly for him. About a year and a half.
And how old are you?
46.
So there's a few things to unpack here. So let's start with the idea that this person is very likely misclassified. He mentions couriers. I've seen this many times with couriers. You work for exclusively for one company. You work for them regular hours, full-time. They tell you what to do, where to go, but they say you're an independent contractor. Well, no, of course not, because you look like an employee. You act like an employee. That must mean you are an employee. You've been misclassified, okay? So if the company controls what you do and you work full-time, guess what? You are an employee. Now, what does that mean? That means you have the rights of an employee. You have the right to get paid at least minimum wage and vacation pay and overtime pay and severance if you're let go. All right. So this person was let go. He's owed severance. But there's another issue here. If he is not getting paid properly and he's raising that as an issue, and that's why he gets fired, well, we call that a reprisal. You cannot be fired because you're standing up for your rights. You cannot be fired because you're asking questions or demanding proper payment. That's, again, illegal reprisal. There's significant consequences for an employer that does that. But remember, if you look like an employee and act like one, you are an employee.
And a reminder as we get to another break here shortly, ask at EmploymentLawyer.ca. You want to send an email along anytime to Lior. And our third phone call from the show is coming up after the break as well. So stick around. This is Ask a Lawyer on CP24.
You have questions about your employment rights? Ask a Lawyer is here for you. Each week, experts from EmploymentLawyer.ca answer your questions. Visit cp24.com/askalawyer and watch Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on CP24.
And we are back. Ask a Lawyer here on CP24. John Scholes, your host, and always Lior Samfiru from EmploymentLawyer.ca is the guy with all the knowledge answering all the questions. You can reach out after the show. Always 1-888-861-4555. Email is ask at EmploymentLawyer.ca. And as I mentioned a couple times during the show, we're on radio across the country, but right here in the GTA. Convenient for you to call in Sundays, 1 p.m. on News Talk 1010. Lior, phone call number 3 from our radio show. Let's get to it right now.
I was recently temporarily laid off, and I was just wondering if they gave me a 13-week period, and I was wondering if I'm able to ask them for severance.
How long have you worked for the company?
7 years.
Well, temporary layoffs, John, and we've talked about this before. An employer does not have a right in most cases to put you on a temporary layoff, or to put it more correctly, more accurately, you can choose to treat the temporary layoff as a termination of your employment. You don't have to sit at home. You don't have to wait. You don't have to sit wondering when you'll be called back. You can make the decision. By putting me on a temporary layoff, that is a termination. Now I am owed severance. So the question, of course, becomes, how much severance am I owed? Let's see what this person would get by way of severance. We're going to go back to our severance calculator. You can find that at pocketemploymentlawyer.ca. And let's see. So been there for 7 years in a sales role, age of 57. Company says, no, we're not going to pay you severance because it's just a temporary layoff. Except we know it is a termination, that severance is owed, and we see this person is owed 8 months of severance. That's how easy it is. You can do the same thing for yourself. But remember, that temporary layoff is a termination if you want it to be.
Let's get to a quick email here, Lior. Again, ask at EmploymentLawyer.ca is where you want to go to send an email along as well. Says, I was dismissed from my job after 4 years because of one customer complaint. This was the first one I was told about, but my boss said there were 2 more in my file from when I first started working. Can they legally fire me?
Well, they can let you go, because an employer can let you go with severance pretty much for any reason. Well, what they cannot do is let you go for cause without severance. For the employer to be able to let someone go for cause, again, no severance, they'd have to prove that what the employee did was so bad that it's not possible to continue employing them. That is a very, very high standard. It's almost impossible unless the employee did something terrible. So unless this employer has the goods, they won't be able to prove cause. They have to pay full severance. And this person, depending on how long they work there, could be owed as much as 2 years' pay. So always remember, it's very difficult for an employer to avoid paying you your full severance package.
Got some more questions on the other side of the break, Lior, but we'll take a quick pause and get back to that. More of Ask a Lawyer is on the way on CP24. Stick around.
You have questions about your employment rights? Ask a Lawyer is here for you. Each week, experts from EmploymentLawyer.ca answer your questions. Visit cp24.com/askalawyer and watch Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on CP24.
Okay, welcome back to Ask a Lawyer. So good to have you along for the entire show. If you've been hanging in for 30 minutes, we got a little more to go here. Live streaming, Lior does a ton of it on YouTube and Facebook. If you want to join in on that conversation, you have an opportunity to ask some questions as well. Simply go to @stlawyers.ca, @stlawyers.ca. Lior, here's the question for this week. Says, my sister works 60-hour work weeks without overtime pay during her entire 6-month probation period. After the period ended, They let her go. They lured her away, by the way, from a great job she previously held for 10 years. What is she supposed to do?
Well, let me start with the end. What is she supposed to do? To call me, and to call me right away. And there's 3 really good reasons as to why she needs to call me. First of all, overtime. Overtime is paid if you work more than 44 hours a week. Unless you're in an exempt position like a manager, overtime has to be paid 44 hours a week or more. You get time and a half. So right there, she's owed overtime. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2 is the fact that she's not really on probation. Probation can really only last 3 months. Anything beyond that doesn't make any sense. It's not probation. So you can't really be on probation. Because of that, she was a regular employee, so she can't just be let go anytime without any compensation. Reason number 2. Well, here's reason number 3. She was also recruited from another job. Oftentimes we call this inducement. Inducement happens when you are not looking necessarily to work. The company comes to you and recruits you from another job. In that situation, if you're then let go by the new company, they have to owe you, or they do owe you, enhanced severance that recognizes your time with the previous company. So let's use this as an example. She worked with her former employer for 10 years. She was then recruited away. She went to work for the new company, and she worked there for 6 months. Then she was let go. Well, she's not a 6-month employee now because she was recruited away. She is now a 10-and-a-half-year employee, and she's owed severance like a 10-and-a-half-year employee, which could easily be a year's pay. That's why it's so important to call me. There's those 3 reasons. If that sounds familiar to you, do the same thing. Give me a call.
And that is all we have time for. Thank you so much for tuning in. Come back next week and do it all over again. In the meantime, here's how you reach out to Lior and get a hold of him and his wonderful team. The phone number first, of course, that's going to be 1-888-861-4555. Email ask@employmentlawyer.ca, and that website, always use it. It's free and anonymous, called pocket.employmentlawyer.ca. And finally, join us on the radio show this Sunday, especially, and going forward. News Talk 1010 Sundays at 1 p.m. We'll catch you next time on Ask a Lawyer here on CP24.